Rarely do CIA redactions do published books become declassified. According to our guest, Ali Soufan, his book, The Black Banners, marks the first time ever a U.S. intelligence official has been censored and then had that censorship lifted. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Falk, president of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, and I'm so glad you could join us today. We're with former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Ali Soufan, and today he is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Soufan Group, a New York-based global intelligence consultancy. And I'm so pleased that Ali will be in conversation with a very good friend of our council, Larry Wright. As always, let me remind our viewers that you can always go and purchase a copy of Black Banners with our strategic partner, Dallas's independent bookstore, Interrobang Books. So just go to interrobangbooks.com, type in DFW World, and get a 10% discount on all of your online purchases. I think you saw a lot of the programs that are coming up over the course of the next few days and weeks. To keep up with our programs, go to dfwworld.org. And if by chance you miss a program or you'd like to share a program with your social network, please go to our YouTube channel at DFW World. Now, as I mentioned, Larry Wright is a good friend of our council. You know him as a staff writer of The New Yorker and a prolific author of bestsellers. He's a playwright, he's a screenwriter. In his most recent book, which we had the great opportunity of featuring a few months ago, the end of October, is just a really remarkable, eerily thriller about a pandemic. And if you like to watch that interview, again, let me remind you, you can go to our YouTube channel to see it. In 2007, Larry won a Pulitzer Prize for The Looming Tower. And we were just talking about this. It really is a definitive account of the rise of Al-Qaeda. And you can watch it on Hulu. And there's about 10 episodes. And we were even talking a minute ago about whether or not there'll be a second season of The Looming Tower. But for those of you who have already watched it, you know that Ali Soufan plays a prominent role that no doubt will be discussed between Larry Wright and Ali Soufan. Great to see you, gentlemen. I leave it up to you now.
Thank you, Jim. I thought I would introduce Ali and tell you how I got to know him. I was working on a movie that was eventually called The Siege. And it was about the FBI and the CIA and their struggle over who was going to control terrorism inside the United States. And this movie came out in 1998. And while I was researching it, I was talking to some people at the FBI, and I heard about this young Lebanese American FBI agent who was kind of prize. And they were proud enough about him to mention it to me, but not willing to let me talk to him because he was undercover. But I wrote into the movie a part that was played by Tony Shalhoub, and it was about a young Lebanese American FBI agent. And the movie was about what would happen if terrorism happened in the United States, as it was in Paris and London and Tel Aviv. What if it came to New York? So this was the movie. And I had envisioned Ali Soufan before I ever met him. And then when I was working on The Looming Tower, the CIA, almost exactly what was going on in my movie, was disparaging the FBI for its handling of 9/11 and blaming the FBI for it. And at that point, the FBI decided it would be wiser for them to let me talk to the actual man. And that's when I met Ali Soufan. And that's when I learned that, you know, it was Ali Soufan who, through his skillful interrogations without torture, uncovered the mastermind of 9/11. He was a case agent for the bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen in October of 2000. He was the man who actually got the FBI to withdraw from torture. Once he saw what was going on by the CIA hired contractors, he said he had a choice of either putting the, the contractors and the CIA agents under arrest, or actually just leaving and letting the FBI never get anywhere near this. And thank God he made that decision. So that's our relationship. We've gone on, we've become friends. We're campaigning together for justice for Jamal Khashoggi, a friend of ours. And so we have a long-standing relationship, and I'm really happy to be able to introduce him. So Ali, first of all, I just want people to understand, when they talk about censorship, that's what it looks like. This is what the CIA did to his book, and this happens to be a chapter about his interrogations. Why did the CIA do this?
Well, first, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and thank you, Larry, for this kind introduction. And I think if I learned anything from what you just said, first the siege, and then the end of October, please write happy stuff, because you're perfect. Everything you write happens in real life.
I get a lot of that.
Yeah, please. And don't put me as any character of your stories anymore. No, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be with you. You're a great friend, and you're one of these people who stood up for the truth, regardless how hard it was at the time to talk about what actually happened on 9/11 and the looming tower became the definitive account of that era. To go back to your question, I think after let me start from the beginning with this. After I wrote the looming tower, the Black Banners, I sent the manuscript to the FBI. I'm required to do it by law.
Right.
It was a long process with the FBI. They needed to check that there is no classified information, there is no sources and methods, there is nothing that's published that might hurt our relationships with allies and so forth. I self-censored myself a lot. So the process was long, but it was constructive. And they asked me to make some changes, which I did. And then out of a sudden, out of courtesy, they said they have to show it to the CIA. And unfortunately, the process with the agency was not as productive as it was with the Bureau. Every time we challenged a redaction, they added more redactions. And towards the end, we start seeing them redacting pronouns. So there's sections in the book that literally you don't see pronouns. You don't see I, you don't see me, we don't see my, all of them were redacted. So we realized that this process is does not have national security in mind. It has another reasons. So we decided to publish with the redactions. So what's in the redactions? Two things. Anything that shows that torture did not work, and anything that shows how we actually get the information that was claimed to be as a result of torture. So when the US government censor or classify the account of a US official who was in the room when these things happened, they are basically trying to shape a narrative. There's no sources and methods there. Everybody know that there was torture. There are, for example, a sentence in the Black Banners that said, after they apply sleep deprivation, and then you will see a line being redacted. As a reader, you assume, that subject gave some information.
Yeah.
But if you see the unredacted line now, it said, not a shred of information was given. So when somebody does that, they were trying to shape a narrative. But ironically, they ended up helping the truth. Because the moment they redacted it, they admitted it was true. They classified it on national security ground. So after sleep deprivation, the guy did not give a shred of information, was classified on national security ground. And you see story after story of events that people heard about in presidential speeches, speeches by the vice president, interview by the vice president at the time, US officials, high-ranking US officials, how we stop the dirty bomb in the Washington, D.C. area. You will ask people, Waterboarding is bad. They will tell you, but we stopped the dirty bomb in the Washington, D.C. area. Now you will see in the book, you will have a frontline seating in the interrogation room where you see how the information was obtained. And by the way, it was obtained month and month before enhanced interrogation techniques was approved and before waterboarding. Waterboarding was not approved until August 1st of 2002. Padilla, the alleged dirty bomber, was in custody in May of 2002. So unless you have a time machine, it does not work. But when the government put their things out about the efficacy of the program, they did something very, very tricky. They changed one digit in the day that, and the year that the plot was disrupted. So they said the dirty bomb was disrupted in May of 2003. In fact, you can do a Google search and you'll see that Padilla was arrested in May of 2002 and the plot was disrupted in May 2002. But 2003 makes sense. You know why? Because it's after waterboarding, not before waterboarding. And when I was being interviewed by the Senate, and it was a bipartisan interview, and I was talking actually with a Republican senator, and he mentioned that to me, and I said, no, he was in 2002. And he looked at his staff, he said, can you check that? And they checked it, and he said, yes, sir, he was arrested in 2002. It's like, my God, so-and-so, he named the high-ranking official, sat on this seat in my office, and he told me that he was arrested in 2003. So this is a campaign, this is a deception. And what's important, what's significant about this, that torture, waterboarding, enhanced interrogation techniques, whatever you want to call it, became a wedge issue in the American society, became a partisan issue in the American society. And it is one of these issues that accumulated over the years to create this free fact culture that we live in today.
Yeah.
Iraq War is another example. The connection between Saddam and Al-Qaeda is a third example. So the unredaction of the black banners, the declassification of the black banners could have not happened on a better time for the truth. The truth today is a debased currency in Washington. So now this thing, as I mentioned, did not start now, did not start with the Trump administration. This thing has been going on. The lack of transparency and accountability has been going on for decades and decades. So we still did not see any reckoning for the Iraq War, any reckoning for convincing, brainwashing more than 70% of the American public on the eve of 9/11 that Saddam was behind 9/11. Or that Saddam and Al-Qaeda were working together on WMD.
Yeah.
All these things became a wedge issue in our society. And now let's take one of these wedge issues. Let's show the truth. Let's show that the American public has been a victim of a disinformation campaign to engrave in their psyche a failed program for political reasons. And let's look at the facts and bring the facts back to the discussion.
Ali, there are a lot of fine people working in the intelligence community, but sometimes when you look at it from, you know, a different perspective, it seems almost as if the intelligence community is working against the interest of the American people and not for it. And this politicization of intelligence seems very keen right now. I just wondered how we get away from this place that we are right now.
I disagree with the idea that people inside the intelligence community work against the US government. I know you're not saying that, you're saying it seems. And I think the people inside the intelligence community always give the truth to power. Now, whatever the politicians want to do with this is a totally different thing. Even with torture, I mean, at first hand, now the reader can see, you know, for the longest time, it was a partisan issue. And then when you start hitting on the partisanship of torture and waterboarding and all these things, it became an institutional issue. They made it FBI versus CIA. In fact, you can see now by reading the black banners, it was not an FBI versus CIA. Many of the CIA colleagues in the field who were with me felt the same way I felt. They fought against their headquarters. They pushed back. Many of them left, and when they went back to Washington, they filed complaints with their Inspector General. The Inspector General of the CIA did an investigation that actually shelved the enhanced interrogation program back in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of the IG investigation was they could not find any plot that was disrupted because enhanced interrogation techniques, right? So the CIA fought back. People in the field fought back. However, there are people in the agency at the time who they connected their bureaucratic positions to this program. And there are politicians who were pushing for that program. And the institution gets stuck in the middle. But if you look at everything, if you look at torture, if you look at the Iraq War, if you look at foreign intervention, if you look at all these things that we see every now and then, the scandals that we see in the public domain, it was people in the intelligence community, hardworking folks who took a pledge and an oath to defend this great country, to defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, standing up in front of the American people, raising the right hand, and telling the American people the truth about these things. Usually it happens after a lot of problems, a lot of spins, a lot of political things by politicians. And you will see that now in the Black Banners very clearly, how these threats evolved, how some of these threats were totally exaggerated, taken totally out of context for the sake of political expediency.
Well, maybe you can help me understand. I appreciate your comment about the good people that are working in the intelligence community, and I've met them, many of them myself, and I agree with that. But the institution sometimes, especially of the CIA, has done things that undermine America's place and standing in the world. And torture is especially appropriate to talk about. And one of the things that just has always confounded me is that the CIA knew that torture didn't work. It had done studies of it. And so I'm dumbfounded about the motivation for doing torture, which they knew would not only not succeed, but also make it impossible, for instance, to ever bring any of these people to justice.
Yeah, and I think we need to put it in the context of what's going on at that time. You have political leadership, and let me be frank, the Office of the Vice President and Dick Cheney himself, who were pushing for two things. They were pushing for the Iraq War, and they are pushing that we cannot take any chances with these prisoners, do whatever needs to be done in order to get information. And they didn't want to hear that we have people in the CIA, in the FBI, in the military who are trained and who know how to deal with these guys. They thought actually 9/11 just came out of thin air. And you research it hard enough to know that it did not come out of thin air. And there are a lot of people who were fighting that fight.
Yeah.
After the East Africa Embassy bombing, the USS Cole, the Millennium operations, and so forth. Dozens and dozens of operations where we won way more than we failed. So they wanted to kind of give the idea to the public that this is something new, and we had no idea, we were not warned, and that's why we need to do, the gloves need to be off. Unfortunately, there are some leadership at the time in specific agencies who were willing to give the political leadership whatever they want for the sake of access. Remember, it's a slam dunk. Yeah. Remember the Iraq War?
Right.
And torture is one of these issues. And if you look at the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence report, the SISI report, and you look at the Armed Services Committee, the report that was done under the leadership of Senator McCain, you will see that. You will see these things very clearly, where a lot of the support institutionally for the program came because of political reasons and political access more than anything else.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm seeing some of that same thing going on in the COVID world. Let's talk a little bit. We've been talking about what happened with terrorism in the past, but you continue to monitor the terrorist world through Soufan Associates. Would you give us a little brief idea about where we stand right now with terrorism and the threats?
Well, I think before 9/11, and tomorrow I think that the anniversary of 9/11, the 19th anniversary. Before 9/11, Al-Qaeda had about 400 members, mostly based in Afghanistan. Those are the people who gave an oath, pledge a bay'ah, to Osama bin Laden. Today, Al-Qaeda alone have probably more than 40,000 members. And they are not only in Kandahar or north of Kabul, they are also in Yemen, in Somalia, in Mali, in the Sahel region. They have cells and groups, that operate all the way from the western shores of Africa to Southeast Asia. Their strategy is a little bit different than it used to be. They have a plan, Al-Qaeda, and we recovered their plan, and we know what it is. It is called the management of savagery. And basically, it's 3 stages. Stage number 1, you do a lot of terrorism in order to weaken the global order and the regional order. This will have states collapse. When regional states and nation states collapse, their job is to basically not allow anyone to fill the vacuum. Because whoever is going to fill the vacuum, according to them, according to their plan, this is their words, not mine, is going to be the new agent for the Americans. Number 3, when you have these vacant spots that's controlled by Al-Qaeda, because they did not allow anyone to fill it, and they build relationship with tribes, with people, with groups in these areas, then they will establish the caliphate and establish the states. Now Al-Qaeda believe that they are in stage number 2. As you know, ISIS is the bastard child of Al-Qaeda. It came out of Al-Qaeda. And ISIS believed that they were, after Syria, they were already in phase 3, not phase 2, with the establishment of the caliphate. So Al-Qaeda today, strategically, in the long run, and in the long term, in different regions around the world, are considered bigger threat than ISIS. ISIS is trying to recover after the defeat of their so-called caliphate. It's not gone in any way, shape, or form. I think they will be able to come back in one form or another. Remember, after 9/11, Al-Qaeda was extremely weak. They were a dying breed until the Iraq War came, and that gave them a new lease on life. And ISIS will have a new lease of life sooner or later. So the threat is going there. Just because we don't hear it in the media, it does not mean it doesn't exist. Now, we have another threat that's emerging. It's the threat of white supremacy and anti-Semitic groups. And this is not only in the United States, it's also in many Western countries. Ironically, they behave very much like the jihadis. They actually admire the jihadis. There's a group in the United States, for example, called The Base. The Base is a translation of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
And if you look at their manuals, they actually use Al-Qaeda's manuals. And if you look at the reading requirements, they have Inspire magazine by Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Their flags also are black. They are very similar to Al-Qaeda and ISIS with the fact that they are anti-globalists. They believe the world is controlled by Jews. All this, baloney stuff that you hear from these groups. But also at the same time, they learned a lot from the jihadis, how to build a global network, how to recruit, how to use social media. The jihadis want a society that's pure religiously. the white supremacists want society that's pure racially. You know, the jihadis are looking for an Armageddon. The white supremacists looking for their own version of Armageddon was to accelerate a race war, accelerationism. The jihadis in the 80s, for example, and the 90s had a big place where they went, they met, they established a global network through that place. They trained, they get combat experience, and that place is called Afghanistan. The white supremacists have the same thing, and they go to Ukraine, and they actually fight on both sides of the conflict. There is a lot of groups, even from the US, they go and they fight under the banner of Russia in Eastern Ukraine, usually recruited by an entity called the Russian Imperial Movement. And there is another group that goes and fight against the Russians. And usually they fight under groups that's considered officially part of the Ukrainian National Guards, but they are very much like the Taliban in Afghanistan. Azov Battalion, for example, is one of them. So we're seeing striking similarities between both. The jihadis, they do martyrdom videos. The white supremacists, they put a manifesto. A lot of similarities. They are learning from each other. And many countries in the Western world are taking this thing very seriously. Frankly, you know, even the Trump administration and the national security strategy drafted by General McMaster referenced white supremacy, specific white supremacy groups as a threat to the national security of the United States.
So I want to remind our viewers that you can go down to the bottom of the page where it says Q&A and pose a question. And I think that one of them here is from Sophie Khan. If the lack of accountability and transparency and the disinformation campaign on torture has been going on for decades, how can we move to accountability and transparency?
Well, I think one of the first steps here is to have transparency on this issue. And I think what happened with the Black Banner is an indication of that. You know, I'm very grateful for the current leadership of the CIA. I'm very grateful for the CIA to basically declassify this book, agree to declassify it after 9 years. This is a major act of institutional transparency that is going to contradict a lot of the lies that have been told to the American public and engraved in their psyche about torture, about enhanced interrogation techniques, about torture, about waterboarding and so forth. So under Trump, we have what looks to be a fact-free culture. But this fact-free culture is merely taken to its logical next step. You know, this has been going on for many decades. The truth has been swamped by conspiracy theories, by partisan talking points, by raw emotions, by alternative facts now, you know. Opinions now enjoy the same status as reality. So, you know, no wonder our enemies and our adversaries find it easy to divide us with this information, because they saw what happened in the last 3-4 decades, and waterboarding is only, and torture was only one of these elements. So look, democracy depends on lively exchange of opinion, but always based on a mutual understanding of the truth. You know, we are witnessing today the erosion of this shorted truth. We don't agree on anything. That is why I believe the release of this book is extremely important, because it corrects the record on one of these wedge issues. It shows that there is transparency. It shows when there is transparency, you will know the truth and you will know the facts on one of these vital issues. So hopefully we can push for transparency on other issues and try to know the truth and the facts before it's too late. Because without that, unfortunately, we're losing trust, as the question mentioned. We're losing trust in the institutions. We're losing trust in the media. And that is why we are in the position that we are in today. We don't believe anything. And I think when the government becomes more transparent, when we start having real accountability for what happened on 9/11, for the Iraq War, for the lies that were sold to the American public in the last 30, 40 years, then, maybe then, we can bring truth back to our political discourse. And without that, I think our democracy is in big trouble.
I mentioned earlier about Jamal Khashoggi and our interest in bringing justice and accountability for his murder. But it seems to have bounced back onto you now that the Saudis have started waging an attack that looks very similar to the one that they used against Jamal before they actually killed him. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, early May, the US government approached me and they said that I have a threat on my life. I was, not frankly surprised when they said that. I thought, I've been helping, as you know, a lot of hostage families in trying to find the remains of the American hostages that were murdered by ISIS. So that took me to the region. I interviewed members of ISIS, some very well-connected people over there. So I thought it was most probably ISIS, and they are really upset about what I'm doing. And I was shocked when the US government said, no, it's Al-Qaeda. I'm like, after all these years, I mean, like, you know what? They really didn't forget, huh? But a couple of days after, we started to notice, my colleagues in my firm, we started to notice a very coordinated disinformation campaign against me. So this disinformation campaign included threats, intimidations, and we took it seriously because of the threat that we were just told by the US government. That campaign on social media included some imagery and some allegations that is similar to the threat that I was told, by the US government. I was informed by the US government. So we start looking into it, and we did forensic analysis. Countering disinformation is something we do, one of the services that we do in the firm. We did forensic analysis, and we linked the campaign to a network in Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And we went actually further in linking it to people in the Saudi government. So we shared all this information with the US government, with the FBI, and now they are looking also in that foreign influence operation that the Saudis are doing, plus the threat from Al-Qaeda. Throughout our investigation, we stumbled into something really shocking. We stumbled into the anatomy of the attack that they had against Jamal Khashoggi before they killed him. Now, interestingly enough, some of the same people who are attacking me were attacking Jamal Khashoggi. Some of the same bots was involved in both attacks. And also, in the same time, some of the language that was used against Jamal, very similar to the language that was used against me. Like, for example, they told Jamal, you're gonna end up in a garbage can. They told me, I'm gonna end up in a garbage can. They told Jamal, the end is near. They told me the end is near. They told Jamal, keep watching your back, we're gonna kill you. They told me the same thing. And so when we saw that, and we saw the way, the architect of that campaign, the way they put the false allegation, the way they use verified accounts to spread it, the way they use fake, bots and fake accounts to basically give it a fake viral feelings to it, because there's a lot of likes and a lot of the way that they are using sock pocket accounts, which basically an account that look as if it's an American account, but it's not. So they try to interfere in our political discourse here. So definitely, we shared that information also with the US government. And I think that Washington Post a couple of days ago. They wrote a story on what happened to Jamal on social media, how they assassinated him on social media before they assassinated him in their consulate in Istanbul. Interestingly enough, Jamal knew who they were. Jamal actually, the person who started the attack against me and the attack against him, he claimed to be a journalist. So Jamal actually told him that he is a member of the Electronic Army, the Saudi Electronic Army. Mm-hmm. And he said they put real people in jail. Saudi Arabia, they put real journalists in jail. So the arena will continue to be vacant for empty people like you. So he actually challenged them. And interestingly enough, all these threats, including the threats against me, including the fact that we want to kill you and dismember you, want to put you in a garbage can, including the lies that I'm involved in conspiracies. Obama put me in charge of destroying the Muslim world, and then Trump renewed for me. And I'm doing all this destruction. So I was involved in a cover-up of 9/11 to blame the Saudis, even though it was the Israelis and the Americans and the Iranians and the Qataris who were behind 9/11. All these allegations, even allegations that they were taunting Jamal after they murdered him, calling him names. All of these things in Twitter Arabic is still online. Is still online. And Twitter, way over their head in understanding what's happening on their platform in the Arab world. Their platform in the Arab world today is not a platform for freedom of expression. It's a platform for intimidation, control, and yes, eventually murder. And they need to stand up and clean their act in Twitter Arabic.
There's a question about America's vacancy in the leadership of the world and the consequences. What do you think about it? You see this, and what do you think are the consequences of it, and how can we reclaim, or should we reclaim, that place?
I think this is the #1 threat facing the United States, our position in the world. And when we're moving away from many regions, from Asia, from the Middle East, from a lot of different places in Europe, I think it's emptying these regions for other powers that is more than willing to take our position and our place. We see the Chinese expanding their influence in Asia and other places. We see the Russians doing the same thing in Europe and also in other places. And I think this is the biggest threat. And the worst thing about that threat, that is self-inflicted. We're doing it to ourselves. It's not like a major power outsmarted us in any way, shape, or form. And I think if we continue to lose our position in the world, unfortunately, the world order that was established after World War II, and I'm saying it's not a perfect world order, right? But it's a world order that gave humanity a lot of prosperity. The Chinese are where they are today is because of the world order. The Russians, they are where they are today is because of that world order. Yeah, it has some negative elements to it. There's some negativity to it, absolutely. But these can be fixed. We don't just destroy the whole temple because we don't like a column in it. And I think this is, I believe, the #1 threat. And unfortunately, we see what's happening with China. We see what's happening with Russia. We see what's happening with regional power. For example, Turkey now is trying to expand its influence in the spheres that they historically controlled under the Ottoman Empire. Iran is trying to expand their influence in the region based on what they believe its historical rights, Yemen and other places. A lot of the fault lines that we see in the Middle East are fault lines that existed before World War I, meaning before the US became the regional power in control of the world order. So I think this is extremely threatening, and I think this probably is the #1 national security threat for the United States today.
But do you feel there's any merit to the feeling in the Trump administration that we've gotten too involved in conflicts around the world that are not our business and that we don't really have the power to resolve?
Well, I think it's what Colin Powell said. It's a part of your barn rule. You break it, you own it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Now, Iran, after the death of Qasem Soleimani, they made their own strategy. They declared it. They want to get the United States out of Iraq, period, right? So what is the position of the United States today? Is to get out of Iraq. Now, we can argue there's a lot of merits to it. There is, you know, but it depends on how the conditions. Now, when we get out of Iraq, which strategy won? Us or the Iranians? What kind of message are we going to give to allies who fought and supported us in Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing in Afghanistan. What message are we going to tell the Afghani government when we left them on the side and we went and we negotiated with the Taliban without including them? And now we're trying to include them, but, you know, in a country that everybody remember what happened to Najibullah and his brother when they hung them from a telephone pole in Kabul, right? So there are a right way to pull out and there are wrong ways. The right way is to pull out with a deal that can bring all the regional power that's involved into an agreement, right? And that is the job of diplomats. Unfortunately, diplomacy increasingly have been a dying breed in the US.
Yeah.
You know, we believe that diplomacy is the act of talking to our friends. Diplomacy is the act of talking to the enemies, not to the friends. You know, we don't need diplomacy to talk to our friends.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in a place like Afghanistan, if we really need a way to move forward and pull out, which I believe we should, I think we need to bring Iran, we need to bring Pakistan, we need to bring India, we need to bring China, we need to bring Russia, and we need to bring all the different factions in Afghanistan. You know, not only the Taliban, but the other Pashto groups, for example, that's against the Taliban, or the Hazara, or the Uzbeks, and so forth. Unfortunately, this is not what's happening. And that's why I fear when we pull out without setting up the appropriate conditions on the ground, that will fire up. Remember, the same people who are basically saying, okay, yeah, we should do it, were the people who went berserk, rightly so, against Obama when we just pulled from Iraq without putting anything on the ground. And look at what happened. So I think the condition is the same, and we shouldn't have partisanship blind our national interest and national security.
There's a question about if there's a Biden administration, what kind of changes should be made in the intelligence community?
I think we need to basically bring trust back. So if the intelligence community did anything wrong, I think we need to expose it. We need to be transparent, and we need to have accountability. That is the only way we can regain trust and regain the trust of the American public and the world, frankly. I think the intelligence community have been doing a great job in sustaining the political division in Washington, D.C. I give a lot of credit, for example, to the director of the FBI. I did a lot of credit to Gina Haspel, the director of the CIA, to a lot of the top leadership in the Pentagon, to the men and women on every level in all these intelligence agencies. I give them a lot of credit because they have been sustaining that political division. Unfortunately, if we as a nation continue to be divided the way we are, I don't know how they can sustain that steadfast, position that they are in today.
Ali, what do you think about, you believe the effect of this pandemic on the world order and, terrorism in particular and so on? How is it going to change our future?
Well, definitely it has a significant impact. Like, for example, on the world order, this is the very first global crisis where the United States is not taking the leadership role.
Right.
And I think the Chinese and the Russians are benefiting greatly from that. Even the Italians are now going with the Chinese on a lot of these issues that have to do with the pandemic. China and Russia is basically, they are trying to, through their disinformation campaign and their propaganda, saying, see, Western democracies cannot deal with, global crisis like this. Look at us. We know how to deal with it. Authoritarianism is a better role model for the world than liberal democracies. And that is so far away from the truth. We are here today is because of the Chinese, lack of transparency on this from day one. Mm-hmm. We are here today because, the Chinese were trying to, because of their authoritarian regime, to crush any information about this global pandemic, even though they know it might be global. And you look at the people who are actually good in dealing with that, and it's all Western democracies, New Zealand, Germany, even Italy now, Spain. A lot of these countries are dealing with it way better than we are in the United States. And the two countries that's kind of like they are pointing fingers out, look, democracies cannot do this, is Brazil and the United States. Now we know the reasons why.
Well, we're coming up on a consequential election. And a lot of the nations that we've talked about are trying to undermine us. How do we counter the meddling with American democracy, and how much difference does it actually make in terms of who we choose to be our leaders?
We are the United States government. We are still the #1 superpower in the world. I can make the argument, the only superpower in the world. And I think we need to send a message. You mess with us, we're gonna mess with you 100 times worse. And we have the capability to do it. Unfortunately, when somebody is messing with us, now what we see, that we call it a hoax. Mm-hmm. We try to threaten people who will say, these people are messing with us. We don't even have an agreement as the American public about Russia's interference, even though the whole intelligence community, to include all the folks that were appointed by President Trump, said, yes, there is significant Russian interference in the 2016 election, and they still are trying to interfere. Now, our answer to it in the United States, we're not allowed to give the briefings to members of Congress or to anyone about Russian interference anymore. Hiding this in plain sight, it does not mean it's gonna go away. It's gonna encourage our enemies to interfere. Today, it's not only Russia, it's not only China. We see Iran, we see North Korea, we see the Saudis, all of them are involved in this. So we need to basically send a very clear and stern message. You mess with us and you're gonna pay. Unfortunately, that doesn't come from the men and women of the CIA or the FBI or the Pentagon. That comes from the political leadership who, unfortunately, until now, don't want to hear about it.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about how you classify, how the government classifies domestic versus international terrorist actors, and what agency's in charge, and who's got a handle on it?
That's a very good question. Actually, that goes with what we talked about white supremacy earlier on. In the United States, we do not have domestic terrorism laws. Even if you are able to prove a domestic terrorism case against an individual, it is very difficult to have a harsh sentence. I'll give you an example. Timothy McVeigh, he blew up a whole building, federal building, killed so many people. And the government could not charge him with domestic terrorism. They charged him with mass murder. So today, if you are a person who basically posting all these anti-Semitic things online, and then you said, I'm gonna go and shoot these people in the synagogue in this area. Friend of yours saw it, like, wow, I better tell the FBI. The FBI goes, they stop that person who's going to do the terrorist act. They stop him in the middle of the road, get him out of the car, get his weapons. You know what? And these things are happening actually. This is not just, So it'll say, yeah, everything I put on Facebook, that is protected by the First Amendment. I didn't mean it. And I'm not going to shoot those people in the synagogue. Actually, I'm going to the Dunkin' Donuts across the street from the synagogue to get some coffee, and then I'm going to the range. And guess what? The judge usually asks the FBI and the government, are you going to file domestic terrorism charges? And they say no, because they can't. And then that guy take back his weapons and leave. The only thing they can charge him with is a violation of the Telecommunication Act. These are the things that's happening. That's why we need domestic terrorism legislation in order to give the tools to law enforcement, to deal with this threat in a very similar way to the way they were dealing with the international terrorism. Unfortunately, there is no will on the Democratic side or on the Republican side in doing domestic terrorism because they have a fear that down the road that can be used by administrations against political opponents. Now, one of the things that we're coming up with is maybe designation. So we can designate these groups as part of a global network. Then we can use international terrorism charges against them. So then we can use material support, for example, to prosecute somebody like this guy who's going allegedly to Dunkin' Donuts, right? That's what we use all the time against ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other groups. This seems to be working for the first time in history, literally. A State Department a few months ago designated the Russian imperial movement as an international terrorist organization. This is very significant. That never happened before. This is the same group I told you before, recruiting Americans to go and fight in Russia,
right?
In Eastern Ukraine. And we're still waiting to see the domestic implication of that designation. Will DOJ now go after the groups and the individuals who operated under the umbrella of the Russian imperial movement here in the United States? And those guys are really scary guys. I mean, we did a report on that, and you can see a picture of one of these guys. His name is Matthew Heimbach, in Russia, next to the Russian imperial flag, right? Wearing a Lebanese Hezbollah t-shirt.
Yeah.
So, and this guy is here in the United States. So that gives you an idea about that threat and how it is a very complicated threat connected with all these terrorist groups that's working against this world order, and how they support each other and work together. So we need to focus on this threat, and we need to give the legal tools that currently do not exist to the people in the US government in order to effectively target it.
Ali, right now there's this international movement called QAnon that has arisen, and it has the aspects of being a terror group. It's international in scope. It's being encouraged by our own president. What's the future of this, and how do we counter it?
Well, you know what? Again, let's go back to the transparency, and let's go back to accountability. When there is no transparency, what you're going to have is conspiracy theories, and groups who basically tell you, hey, the government has been lying to you about everything. The government is, there's an international cabal. They are, and they take a lot of these issues that already exist. Like, for example, you have people who are skeptic about vaccines. So they jump into the anti-vaxxers and try to bring them to believe in a lot of the other conspiracies against George Soros or against Bill Gates and so forth. But this is just a symptom. These groups just a symptom of a society, a democratic society with freedom of speech and freedom of expression that we value dearly. But at the same time, to protect these freedoms, we need accountability and transparency and oversight. So when we only have the first half and we don't have the transparency, we don't have the oversight, we don't have the accountability, then this conspiracy theory is going to start to be a dominant factor in our society, especially when the trust in our institutions down, and especially when the trust in the media is down.
Well, I am going to campaign for you to become the next director of the FBI. I just want to announce that. I feel like this is... I
told you don't mention me again, Larry.
I'll get you in real trouble. It would be nice to have you back serving the country in that way. You've given so much to us already. And it's just been a real pleasure to be able to talk to you and explore some of these ideas. And I want to thank the council for having us here. It's been an illuminating conversation, I think, but also always a pleasure to talk to the Dallas Council.
Larry,
So
it's great
nice
to
be
see you.
here.
And I know you need to run off and we have another minute or two. And Ali, would you mind staying just for a minute? Because I have a
Absolutely.
question. If I,
All right.
so one of the things, thank you, Larry. We'll see you soon. Ali, one of the things that was, of course, in your book and in the Looming Tower in the film is how closely you and your colleagues in the FBI were able to interact and work across boundaries with your counterparts in other countries, particularly even in Kenya and Tanzania and the UK, working with Scotland Yard. Given what's happened in the publicity in our intelligence agencies in this country, is that trust and collaboration threatened, or is it at the same level that it was before?
You know, it's not as good as it used to be before, frankly. And there is a lack of trust sometimes in dealing with the U.S. And I know that from people in our own government, but I also know that from people overseas, allies, for example, very strong allies who have been, with us in the trenches for a long period of time now. If there is information about Russia, for example, they don't share it with us, not because they don't trust the people that they work with. They still trust them. They trust them with their life, their counterpart in the CIA or the FBI or anything. But they don't trust what happened to the information if it goes to the White House. And unfortunately, that's a very scary position to be in. I think the personal relationship that's developed, that will continue. I hope that it will go back stronger than it used to be. Everybody is allowed a mistake. We've been leading the world since World War II in a very, as I said earlier, we have the ups and downs, but to the most part, we stood up to our values. To the most part, we defeated the evil empire, as Ronald Reagan, our great president, called it, based on our values, based on America being the shining city on the hill. The lights might be a little bit out now, but I think we can bring them back. And that's what's great about America.
What about cooperation between the CIA and the FBI?
I think it's a lot better than it used to be before 9/11. I think 9/11 definitely helped in having a more open channel among all the intelligence agencies in the United States. So information now is shared, in a more transparent way than it used to be before 9/11. I think a lot of, I'm not saying that there's no institutional issues that happens every now and then between all the different intelligence agencies that we have, but to the most part, I think it's way better than it used to be.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your service. You're a brave man. Stay safe. I want to encourage as well all of our viewers as well to go to interabangbooks.com and pick up a copy of The Black Banners Declassified. Remember to type in DFW World to get your 10% discount. And I'm sure you enjoyed today's conversation between Ali Soufan and Larry Wright. So I encourage you to share it by going to our YouTube channel, DFW World.